All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials World podcast. And you know what, Brian? Last week we reviewed Boyhood, an amazing Linklater movie. We just finished our Linklater trilogy, right? And maybe for this week, let's review something even more wholesome, more heartwarming, and more true to life than a Richard Linklater movie. Do you think that would be a
More
good idea?
sensitive, something that's really in touch with expressing itself, with being open to discussion. Yeah, I think that that would be a good path to continue on down.
Exactly. And you had a suggestion a little while ago that we review a side project of the Boston hardcore band Blood for Blood, Ramallah. Do you think that would be a good idea, Brian? Once again, heartwarming piece of media.
Oh, Ramallah make me feel very at peace. They make me feel very self-actualized. Listening to them as a young man, I feel like they really helped me address a lot of problems in the world and in myself in a productive way.
Exactly. So, once again, talking about a very heartwarming piece of media. This week, we're going to be reviewing Kill a Celebrity by the band Ramallah. But before we get into our review this week, Brian, let's bring back our segment, Cringe Generational Cringe Millennium, one where the
Cringe,
weekly
cringe, 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 cringe,
review.
cringe.
Woo! Yeah! All right, and Brian, you had a suggestion for the Cringe Millennial segment or Cringe Generational segment, and I was vaguely familiar with it, but I wasn't
All
super
right.
familiar with it. So please expound for me.
Are you familiar with the band Gel, Taylor?
Until they broke up just very quickly, I
Okay.
was not I was not aware of them at all.
So Gel have been since about 2023. They're kind of actually popping off in punk, hardcore, even into like metal spheres. They were gonna play Coachella. They were gonna be on tour with was it like Spirit Box and Loathe and some other pretty big bands. I think very good critical reception from them. I had heard Gel when they first popped off. Either it was a demo tape or a self-titled album that was getting posted online. People were sending it to me because I like hardcore punk and kind of like, especially like retro sounding punk. And I listened to it at the time. And I remember thinking, yeah, this is good. I like this. But I didn't like love it, especially, in the sea of all the punk I was listening to. I was like, oh, yeah, that band Joe. And then I set them aside. And in the background, they're just kind of getting bigger and bigger until a couple of years ago they're actually kind of a famous band all of a sudden, and they're kind of like the punk band that you're reading about, you're seeing about. And then very suddenly this week, or I guess maybe late last week, the band Gel issues an announcement that they're breaking up, and people are like, what the fuck? Because this band is kind of on the precipice, right? Like they're actually look like they're about to become pretty big and maybe transcend this whole punk metal underground thing, right? According to a statement put out by, I suppose, every member of the band except for the guitarist or lead guitarist or whatever, they are breaking up because lead guitarist and primary songwriter, I think his name's Anthony Webster, is, I guess, a nut job. The funny thing about this to me, the thing that makes me want to talk about it on the show is, of course, it's all the awful things that you would expect. He's abusive mentally. I don't know if it's physically. I'm assuming it is from the way I talk. He throws temper tantrums and throws things when he doesn't get his way. The thing that made it cringe, as opposed to just being a shitty guy, were some of the other specifics. He was the only member of the band with access to their finances. So he was spending other members' money on his own personal rent, or I guess on DoorDash orders and Uber Eats and food delivery apps, and on OnlyFans girls in the, I guess, tens and thousands of dollars. And none of the band knew about this until all their money was gone.
So my question is, why would they give the crazy guy access to all the money?
My guess, and again, I don't know, Joe. I listened to their early stuff back in the day and I kind of set it aside. I don't know their whole dynamic. My guess is that this guy writes all the songs, that it's like his band.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes
My
sense.
Because one of the other things they say is he was the only one that was ever driving the tour bus or van or whatever they had. He wouldn't let anyone else drive. And that also, when he was in a bad mood, he would drive recklessly and get them in dangerous situations. It sounds like it was probably, and this doesn't justify anything, but this is probably why they felt like they had to do that. It was his band. He put it all together. He wrote all the songs. I'm guessing, if I'm wrong, please let me know. And he just got them all in a situation where they had invested time and money in the band. And he was, before they knew it, he was controlling everything. Another important detail, allegedly, he also posted nude photos of his bandmates on Reddit without them knowing. They say that it came to their attention because he wasn't, quote, good at covering his tracks. So I don't know if he had nudes of them and he tried to post them on a burner account or what. Like, obviously they would know he's the one that posted them.
You know what's interesting, Brian, is I'm looking up a little bit of their information right now. And on their Wikipedia page, their picture here is from a performance from my local venue,
Yeah, I
which I
just
did
saw
not
that.
know. Yeah, it's from X-Ray Arcade, which is a great local venue here in the Milwaukee area. So that's awesome. That's really cool that they were an up-and-coming band and then one guy was just a piece of shit and basically made this up-and-coming band fucking fall apart. That's lame as
Yeah.
shit. Although, you know
Ruined
what, Brian?
his career and everyone else's. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And you know, speaking of Brian, I think it leads perfectly into our review this week because the original band that Ramallah came from had a similar scandal to this that I
Yes.
read about.
Yes.
But before we get into that real quick, I do want to get into some details of the specific album. So once again, this is Kill a Celebrity by Ramallah. It came out in 2005. I believe this was their second LP, is that correct?
Yes. So they had a 7-inch before this called But a Whimper. That was, I think, altogether like 20 minutes long. This is their first like full-length album.
Okay, gotcha. And once again, it was performed by the band Ramallah. I could not find a consistent personnel, but, you know, the most famous member of this band is obviously white trash Rob Lind, who is
I love
an
Rob. I love him.
interesting character. I watched an interview that you recommended to me, Brian, which was the No Jumper interview where fucking Adam 22, otherwise known as Cuck King, rap
Cuck
guy
King,
extraordinaire, and he talked to him for like 2 hours, and I'm guessing Rob's attic? I'm gonna assume. I don't know. It looks like a random
something
attic.
like that. One of the cool things about Rob, well, before that, in regards to the personnel, as far as I know, Rob on the first release played all of the instruments himself. That's what he's gone on record saying. So I assume that might be the case with this album, but I'm not certain.
Okay, that would make a lot of sense because I could just not find. I went on like 5 different sites. I couldn't find a consistent personnel at all. But that would make sense if he's the only consistent
I
member.
think it's all him except for a drummer. I know that's the case on the first album. I think it's the case on this album.
Oh, okay, makes sense. And then I could not find a record label either. I'm gonna assume it was probably independently released, but I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, they've been on a few different little labels. Rob's previous band, as you probably read to, was actually on Victory Records, which is kind of crazy, you know, in retrospect.
Victory Records, otherwise known as a legendarily well-meaning record label too. They treated all their bands very well. I think we can all agree on it.
Yeah, great guy. Classic good guy. Good businessman. Good at selecting moral people to put on his label.
You know what, though, Brian? Speaking of an episode that will come up shortly, spoilers ahead to the audience at home, but we're going to be covering a band that helped destroy Victory Records. So get ready for that one.
It's going to be great. I think these two episodes will pair together in they'll make interesting parallels in a number of ways.
No, absolutely. And the album was 37 minutes and 45 seconds long. And on Amazon, it has a 4.5 out of 5. And on Rate Your Music, it has a 3.19 out of 5. And before we get to our track listing here, I do have a couple Amazon reviews I want to highlight. Now, just like with a lot of your usual album picks, Brian, there weren't that many reviews. So the Amazon review section was very easy. It took me all of like 5 minutes. So I appreciate that quite a bit. And the first review I want to highlight here is from Out of Left Field, who gives us 5 stars. And the head of the review says, alternative thoughts in small portions. And the body of the review says, I picked up this album after hearing Days of Revenge on the Punisher Warzone soundtrack, which we'll certainly get to that track because that is an hilarious track to be
awesome.
On that movie.
Yeah, I know. It's insane. It's insane.
Because you've not seen the Thomas Jane Punisher, correct?
I have. I would have seen it a long time ago, yeah. Was that the first big one or no?
No, the Dolph Lundgren one from the 90s.
No, but the first one after the Dolph Lundgren one, is that the Thomas Jane one?
Oh, yes, most
okay, so
definitely.
I've seen both of those.
And you know what's hilarious is that, you know, this song, which we will certainly get into in the track listing, of course, was on the same soundtrack as that Seether Evanescence song. It's awesome. I love it.
And I hope Rob is still making money off those fucking Punisher royalties.
I hope. I mean, that movie didn't do very well, so I don't know how many royalties he would have gotten, but still. What you hear is either a terrorist training album or a very interesting critique of modern American celebrity and ethnocentrism.
Terrorist training album.
The rage is still relevant and the topic's hot even many years after its original release. Well, considering the band's name, I would actually argue it's more relevant than ever because things have gotten even worse somehow in the last 20 years in that particular region of the world.
Yeah, we love it. We talk about it every week, but we love the times we live in. We love the world we live in and the country we live in. To the CIA guy that listens to us every week, we love it. We love it.
Absolutely. The Mossad and CIA guy, actually the same person, listens to our podcast and loves it. And the last sentence here is hilarious, Brian. You'll love this. Great album to listen to at the gym or think about at home.
Think about it home. I love to just think about an album at home.
And then our next review here is from Horrorween, which is an amazing username. Please never change. 2006 Hot Topic 14-year-old. That's an awesome username. They give this 5 stars.
All
And
right.
then the review says, also interesting for BFB fans. And the body of the review says,
BFB.
exactly.
Blood for blood.
I did know that one, but I thought it was going to be, because for whatever reason, even though these bands aren't similar, but the acronym is similar to, Black Veil Brides. First,
Yeah,
I'm like,
that's what I was thinking of for a second as
BVB,
well.
and then BFB. I'm like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay. The body of the review here says, Ramallah actually picks up exactly where Blood for Blood left off after Serenity. In contrast to the first Ramallah album, Kill a Celebrity has become significantly more suitable for the masses, but has in no way lost any of the usual harshness, musically or lyrically, parenthetically. One or the other hardcore fans may not like the fact that keyboard sounds often appear on this album, which we will certainly talk about because I have a critique of those. It's a positive critique, but I definitely have critiques of those since.
Yeah, me too.
However, Blood for Blood already had a few pieces that could probably be described much more as white trash, parenthetically, rock and roll instead of hardcore. Musically speaking, the album is definitely great. And my circle of acquaintances also likes many convinced non-hardcorers and metalers. As always, the lyrics are very socially critical and actually only revolve around the topic of terrorism or 9/11. Well, I wouldn't say they all revolve around that. That's not true. I mean, it is a common critique, or there's a common theme on this album, but it's not the only one by far.
Yeah, there's some pretty big divergences there.
At this point, I have to say personally, the ones from Ramallah at least really open up. Not like the rest of the wannabes war opponents, in parentheses, Sheryl Crow, Pink, Springsteen, who all just grovel at Bush. Someone voted for him once.
Yeah, what? What is the comparison here?
Now, to be fair, Brian, this was the review that was from Germany, so I'm not sure if the translation is perfect.
Well,
so this was a German language review.
Yeah, does he listen to this album and think, oh, I bet White Trash Rob voted for W? I don't understand. Is he saying that Rob offers a more complete criticism of global politics and like war or something?
Yeah, I don't get it either. My guess is that he's saying that this is better than like the 2004 like Rock Against Bush people. But like to me, it's like a weird.
It's about the same.
And you know, that's my favorite type of like European is the European who like, you Americans, you're so fucking stupid. And then they'll say like really dumb shit about American politics or culture they don't understand. I love that type of European. They're the most common type of European on Reddit. I love it. It's like 90% of them.
Well, seems like there's more of them every time I go online, or at least more of them talking, which, you know, is because we're fucking their shit up, I guess, but, you know.
Well, also, a lot of parts of Europe recently just got internet, so that's why you may have seen them more.
Yeah.
I mean,
I guess that's good for them.
I shouldn't talk shit too much because honestly, most countries in Europe have a higher human development index than America at this point.
Of course,
or at least a good chunk of them, too.
And in the near future, almost all of them will, most likely.
Oh, yeah, Romania is like pretty close approaching the U.S.'s human development index. But speaking of people who are smarter than your average Romanian, the next review here is from the username Me, who gives this 3 stars. And the head of the review says, unfocused. And the body of the review says, their debut EP, But a Whimper, is truly one of the greatest records ever released. Now, is that true, Brian? Is it one of the greatest records ever released?
No, I could understand someone liking But a Whimper more than this record. I think But a Whimper is a little weirder. It goes a little harder on the like experimental side. It's also like more hardcore than this record, but it's not one of the greatest records ever released. I'm sorry.
No, that's totally fair. This, on the other hand, comes across wanting to cater to the nu metal crowd and the hardcore crowd and satisfying neither. Now, I know we're going to certainly talk about that in the track listing because I've heard this criticism a lot that it's very nu metal, but I don't agree with that. I just don't agree with that.
I don't agree with that now, but, well, I'll let you finish this review and I'll get to it.
No, okay. Well, just one sentence left. So, not a bad release, but their debut EP is, I think they meant a demonstration, but they put demonstration of what this band is capable of when confines itself to one genre. So, Mr. Demonstration had a lot to say here. Oh, God.
So, regarding the nu metal thing, because I want to kind of get it out of the way here, because that is part of the reason I selected this for the show and part of the reason I wanted you to hear it. I want to just tell my Ramallah origin story really quick. So, in 2007, and I know this because I had to find the article that I read at the time, I was really into like classic hardcore. I was into like 70s and 80s punk, and I was all into it. And I was like, this is the only shit I like. It's the best music in the world. And I knew nothing about like modern hardcore. It just wasn't around. comedy, right? And I was at my brother's house and he had an issue of Rolling Stone there. And I was bored, so I was flipping through Rolling Stone. And all of a sudden I see this article where it's like, oh, it's talking about hardcore here. So I start reading it. And it's about the FSU, the hardcore anti-racist, but also criminal gang that's also like a criminal gang. And the main point of the article is talking about a guy who got stabbed for wearing a Confederate flag and refusing to take it off at a Ramallah show, right? So I'm like, oh man, a racist went to this band's show and he got fucking stabbed. I'm also like, and their name is Ramallah, and I'm thinking like, oh, this is like Boston hardcore. I'm thinking of some 80s band. I'm thinking, oh, it's gonna be like the Freeze or Gangrene or Proletariat or something. So I'm psyched to hear this band. I'm thinking about it all weekend or all week or whatever. I get back from my brother's house, I download this album and I put it on, and I'm kind of like, I'm hearing what the band actually sounds like, and I'm like, what the fuck is this? This sounds like nu metal to me at the time. And I kind of like it, but I also like can't decide how I feel about it, right? Because it is not what I was considering hardcore at that time. I've heard a lot of people say that this is nu metal, and I've heard Rob speak about nu metal in a pretty positive way, in that, I think it's in the No Jumper interview, he says that he feels like a lot of early nu metal, and he says Korn specifically, took a lot of elements from hardcore, and he says that he's not knocking it, he feels like they focused on really strong, heavy songwriting, and that's what broke them past hardcore into the mainstream. I don't think he would consider his music nu metal, and I think if you told Rob Lind that, he would not be particularly pleased with it, but I do understand when people say this is nu metal adjacent, like why they would think that, especially if they hadn't heard a lot of hardcore. Like at the time, I thought that I had never heard any hardcore from like any New York hardcore from the 90s or any of that like kind of post-hardcore type like crossover stuff, you know. So my closest reference point was like, oh, is it doing like nu metal? Like now I can kind of look back and I'm like, oh, it's kind of like he's doing Suicidal Tendencies, Agnostic Front type thing. And actually listening to this week, I think the Suicidal Tendencies influence is huge. But I get why people have called this nu metal, although I also don't agree.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. Like, when I listened to this album, and like I said, we'll get to individual tracks and individual moments, but I heard this, and there is a particular proto-nu metal band that were very evident to me when I listened to a lot of these songs, and that is Faith No More, specifically. And I was like, oh my God, they are doing Faith No More synths on a, like, Boston hardcore album. This is awesome. I love this.
When you told me that, when you mentioned the Faith No More thing, initially I was like, kind of like, huh? Because that's just not really how I think of this band. Like when I listen to them now, or when I think of them as like in the lineage of like this this Boston hardcore thing. You know, I think of like One Life Crew and Integrity, and then earlier hardcore. And then I was re-listening to the album, and especially when it got to those melodic vocals and the synths and the keyboards, I was like, oh, Taylor's right. And all of a sudden it like hit me. I was like, oh yeah, he was like really into Faith No More at the time that he wrote this, for sure.
And you know, as a giant fan of Faith No More myself, I totally get it. They're one of my favorite bands of all time.
Oh, they're so fucking... Although, I'm gonna say, I like the Patton stuff at least as much... Or I like the Mosley stuff at least as much as the Patton stuff.
No, agreed. Even though Chuck Mosley was nowhere near as close as good a vocalist as Mike Patton. But his energy, I think, worked well for early Faith No More. I think it worked quite well.
Very, yeah, much more like of a like punk singer type. But it worked.
No, absolutely, 100%.
There are some other weird influences in this album. Like, you can tell that for White Trash Rob, Ramallah is like him trying to expand his musical vocabulary. So, of course, there's this Faith No More thing. There's also references like The Doors and some pretty huge nods to the Beatles on this album.
Yes, and there's actually a cover song from them, and I can't wait to get to that because that is a great song, just being clear. I think it's a great rendition of that song. But the track listing here, so just to get it started here. So, the first one's just an intro track. It's called The Other Side. Lyrics are very basic. Here I am, here I stand on the other side. It's like 28 seconds long. And there's a reprise that we'll skip over later. And the actual first, like, actual track on this album is Kill a Celebrity, which is, of course, the title track. It's certainly not vague about what it's trying to say. In fact, let me just bring up the fucking lyrics of this, because this is nuts. The CIA Mossad agent who, once again, is listening to our podcast will love this. So, it starts off like this. I'd love to detonate a car bomb at the doors of your precious MTV and put some sarin gas in the central AC at the VMAs and watch those beautiful faces turn ashen gray. There is no turning back. Oh, sweet release. God will forgive me. Wow.
And really sets the tone for this album. So, from all the interviews with Rob that I've read and listened to over the years, my kind of take on this is I think Ramallah is like Blood for Blood is like his band about his upbringing, about, the personal, the introspective, the interrelationship struggles and things, things with falling outs with friends. Ramallah is like him having this political awakening, presumably having to do with like post 9/11, like Bush era insanity and Islamophobia, and of course, the ongoing genocide in Gaza. Like something hit him where he was like, I need to do an album about this. But he's still coming at it with the same classic Blood for Blood, like tough guy energy. I mean, it's cool, but it's very funny.
It is very fucking hilarious. But yeah, the entire song is basically just about how he hates celebrities. He compares it to opiate of the masses, just in general is very anti-celebrity, anti-rich culture, which to be fair, I mostly am too. But at the same time, it's very funny because especially later on in the album, he like mentions very specific celebrities and I'm like, oh, this dated this so hard. But at first it's like, it's actually pretty like neutral and it's like, oh yeah, this could be a song with lyrics made today, I suppose. Maybe not the MTV and VMAs part because nobody gives a fuck about those institutions anymore, but hey, whatever.
It's like a classic hardcore guy energy. The thing that I will say also to Rob's credit, and there's a few things, I like White Trash Rob quite a bit, even when his lyrics are funny. I think they're pretty good for the type of music he makes. I think he's an interesting frontman. One issue with a lot of hardcore, especially the hardcore that Ramallah and Blood for Blood are influenced by, stuff like Suicidal Tendencies, Cro-Mags, Agnostic Front, is that while they talk a lot about like things being fucked up in the world and about unity and the world's out to get us and you have to fight back, they're very vague. They're vague to the point of kind of not being about anything. And a lot of times when you really dissect lyrics, especially by, say, Agnostic Front or the Cro-Mags, you kind of realize that they're actually a little bit reactionary, or in some cases very reactionary, especially in Agnostic Front's case. The thing with Ramallah is that Rob has sort of taken that energy and he's making it so explicit that I don't think you could interpret it any other way.
Well, you know what, Brian? I think that leads perfectly actually to our next song here, which is the most famous song in the album. The one that we mentioned is on the Thomas Jane Punisher soundtrack, which is Days of Revenge. Now, this one's interesting because this is the first song that has the Faith No More, and also I included on here, even though this band is a clear knockoff of them, but I wanted to include them anyways because this was the band more doing the style at this point, because Faith No More had broken up by this point. But Mushroomhead, because Mushroomhead are a band who I think famously ripped off Faith No More, even though they were in a feud at one point with Slipknot, even though they have, I would say, a fairly similar aesthetic, but their sound is nothing alike. Like, Slipknot were obviously much more influenced by, like, fucking death metal and stuff like that, whereas Mushroomhead were clearly influenced by rap and Faith No More. That is just a hilarious thing for a band of that aesthetic to have. But either way, they had a very similar synth style to this song and a lot of songs in this album. And I also wanted to highlight on here, and this one's not at fault for the band at all, but there's a couple lyrics here I want to highlight. So, once again, this is on a Marvel movie soundtrack. Some lyrics are here, and Malcolm is right. The hate that we've sown has come home in the night. Now, once again, we'll talk about it, but he's referring specifically to Malcolm X. Specifically, he's referring to Malcolm X. There was a positive Malcolm X shout out in a Marvel movie soundtrack. Awesome.
Yeah,
cool.
Why is this on the Punisher soundtrack? It's just because the phrase "sweet revenge" is in it, right?
No, absolutely. Oh, also the lyric, and I'm gonna call out one of the biggest dipshits I've ever seen on the internet for this specific genius annotation. But also the line "Blessed Martyrs of Palestine" is once again on a Marvel movie soundtrack, which nowadays is cool as shit. But back then, being pro-Palestine was not particularly very kosher, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, it was truly a hot take, if you will.
Yes. And the genius annotation is amazing because I think this person is either a Zionist or the biggest dipshit of all time. Well, those things are not mutually exclusive. But anyways, the genius annotation for Blessed Martyrs of Palestine, the genius annotation is, this is most likely referencing the book On the Martyrs of Palestine about the ancient Roman Palestinians. And it's like, no, that's not what the reference is.
Is this a joke? Is it possible this person's joking? Because that's too dumb. Like, this song is so explicit about what it means.
But you got to remember, Brian, there's a lot of people that think Rage Against the Machine were conservative. Like, a lot of people are stupid.
You're right. Yeah, there are people who just are like, yeah, they're libertarians. They're raging against the machine of political correctness. That's true.
Yeah, Bulls on Parade was about the bull run on the stock market. But yeah, so this song is once again about revenge and basically about how American, or was it chickens come home to roost or whatever? Basically
Yeah.
about blowback. That's essentially what the
Yeah.
song's
Yep.
about.
Yes. And musically, probably the definitive Ramallah song in that it's got this chugging kind of crossover hardcore like riff. And, at the heart of it, it's very aggro. It's very sing along, very chanty, but it's also somewhat melodic on the vocals. It's got kind of a catchy, almost poppy chorus. As you said, Taylor, it's got these very like Faith No More kind of like digital, like almost supposed to be cinematic synths on it. If I had to show a person Ramallah and just describe their sound, this would be the track because it's got all of those elements in it pretty well balanced.
No, absolutely. And then speaking of, that leads perfectly into our next song, Ramallah, which is, of course, the band title track here. And this song is, I think, very specifically a sequel to Revenge. It's basically, I guess, more planning the route of blowback, I guess, is the best way I can put it. Talk about, obviously, terrorist training album. This is, I guess, the song that would really lead perfectly to that.
The funny thing is, I think Ramallah were an obscure enough band that you didn't hear about a lot of people losing their minds about them. But this did come out in 2005.
That is true. Like, this was really the beginning of when Bush's approval rating started to drop pretty significantly. But this would have still been a pretty rough album. Like, you probably could have gotten, like, fucking death threats from conservatives over this one pretty easily.
I do like this song, and I pretty much like this whole album. You will see that this is the beginning of, they do kind of get into a mode in the pocket where they're doing very kind of this cool chugging mid-tempo punk metal hybrid thing with a little bit of weirdness mixed in here and there. But we're getting to a section in the album where they're really in the pocket with like a crossover metal style. And if you like it, if you like that style, you'll probably like this. And if you're not into that style, there probably isn't a lot here for you.
No, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And the next song on here is Drink the Kool-Aid. Now, this is another one where, once again, this one's more of like a rant style song than some of the others. Like, some of the other songs this album are still rant style songs, but this is definitely another one here. It says, "Here comes the 757s. If you don't ask why, then you deserve to die. Just like the millions that are ground underfoot." And I think this is the one where it's like, oh, never mind. That's the Beatles cover. But there is a specific line in the Beatles cover where I literally said, oh my God, they really said that. But either way, this one is, drink the Kool-Aid, of course. Famously, drink the Kool-Aid is a phrase for when you just basically drink up what they serve you, I guess, whether it's good or bad. But I think it's specifically a reference, of course, to Jim
guy.
Jones. But Jim Jones gave them Flavor Aid, not Kool-Aid.
Flavor Aid, exactly. Thank you.
We will not besmirch big brands on here, Brian. We are big brand bootlickers. You know that.
I would not besmirch Jim Jones on this show.
Yeah. I mean, he was a very strong civil rights leader. He literally was one of the leading forces of desegregating the entire state of Indiana. So there's something positive.
A great Marxist-Leninist. A true student of the immortal science of Marxist-Leninism.
I'd rather be a great student of Immortal Technique, if you know what I mean. I dance with the devil a lot, Brian. Actually, I'm not.
Should we talk about Immortal Technique on this show sometime?
Oh, absolutely, because that is peak elderly millennial like backpack rap. Even though Immortal Technique is a great artist, but oh my God, his fans.
But also it's cringe as fuck. And even
he's
he's kind of cringe. Like, to be honest, he's a great artist, but he's also like, come on, man.
I mean, he did throw Lin-Manuel Miranda in a dumpster, so can we really hate him?
Based.
Yeah, based as fuck. And then, well, speaking of based songs, Brian, next one on here is Oscar Cotton. Now, here's the thing about this song. Personally, in my opinion, I think this has some of the strongest lyrics on this album.
Yes.
I think they're very introspective. But I will say, musically, I think this is the worst song in the album. I hate the butt rock shit on it. It's awful.
I'm glad you said the butt rock thing because I have the same feeling, and I have that feeling throughout this album, especially with some of Rob's vocals. His intent, I don't think, was to try to do like a mainstream 2000s rock. I think he was trying to flex his kind of melodic classic rock influences. Lyrically, I agree. I think these are the most literary lyrics on the album. This is the closest to what Rob's podcast, the Nodcast, is like. Nodcast is kind of him doing a mix of spoken word and kind of like slam poetry, where he talks about, his upbringing, his struggles with violence and addiction. And that's what the lyrics to this song a lot of the time remind me of. Musically, I kind of like it. I'm glad there isn't more of it on the album, but I think the nice kind of the melodic shift, and I think it does sound butt rocky. track. It doesn't sound all that different from, say, Stained or something. I think what he's trying to do is maybe kind of Bad Religion thing, or like you're familiar with the band Rise Against?
Oh
Like,
yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm
yeah,
from the upper Midwest. I definitely know about
yeah,
Rise Against.
yeah. So this kind of is like a dumb guy version of Rise Against to me on this track. But I don't hate it, but it does kind of change the momentum of the album, and it's not their strong suit. Like I enjoy the track, but what White Trash Rob is really good at writing is hardcore. And when he gets into that pocket of that kind of chugging aggro punk metal hybrid that is most of this album, I think he does it really well. He's trying something different on this album. It does work for me, but it is a little awkward.
No, totally. And I want to be clear, like, even though I think this is the worst song musically on the album, but when I first heard like the post-grunge butt rocky stuff, I did laugh. I'm like, bro, really?
Okay. Now imagine that was my experience when I was 16 or whatever. I built this album up in my head from reading that Rolling Stone article, and I downloaded it, and then I heard the intro, the Other Side intro, and I was like, what the fuck is this?
No, fucking totally. There are a couple bands that when I first heard them, I did think that. And one of them was once again Mushroomhead. Because, like, you hear about the Slipknot feud, you see their aesthetic, and you're thinking, like, oh my God, these guys are going to be, like, fucking black metal as shit. And then you listen to them, and it's like, wait, why is this guy rapping over Faith No More style synths? Like, what the fuck?
I've never listened to Mushroomhead. Are they kind of, would you compare them to, like, Green Jelly, maybe?
Green Jelly. I've heard the name, but I'm not familiar with them, to be honest.
Well, like, they did the Three Little Pigs song, they do, like, comedy metal, kind of. They did, like, Nightmare on Sesame Street. Maybe they're not alike at all.
I'll have to look into that. All right, and after that song, the next one is Brother Malcolm. Now, this was one of the few songs I could not find lyrics for, but I don't think we have to really look for the lyrics here because this one's very obviously a song about Malcolm X and how much he means to this band, America, and just in general, his, I guess, impact in general. It's not the most complex song to understand, I'll say that.
Yeah, this is pretty clear. It's also one of the moments on this album. It's kind of nice, even though it's, obviously it's very heavy-handed, but it's kind of nice because this album is pretty unrelenting in its worldview. And while that's still present in this, it's at least warmer sounding. It's basically Rob Lind looking at Malcolm X, who is someone that, he admires, and saying like, oh, you came up through all of this world of oppression and hate, and like, you should be like an aspirational figure for me and for everyone. Now, that can sound really silly. When you listen to Rob Lind talk a little bit more about his life and his upbringing and what hardcore means to him and what like his political awakenings mean, and having suffered through a lot of abuse, a lot of violence, and a pretty extreme drug addiction throughout his life, it does make it seem a little less hokey to me. This is a very heart on his sleeve album about Malcolm X being someone he admires and who he thinks just on a human level we should all kind of strive to be as honest and as strong in the face of like evil as he was.
No, absolutely. And then the next song on here, we'll talk about child abuse and stuff like that. This one is The Horror and the Gag. And I will say, before I watched the White Trash Rob interview and before you told me about it, I listened to these lyrics and I'm like, what the fuck are these lyrics? Because I was coming in here pretty blind from the context. But now I understand. And I'm like, oh, okay. I get it. I get it now. But at first I'm like, it was like that one Suicide Silence song where you're like, wait, is this guy being like, if you're a drug addict, you're a pussy? And it's like, that was like kind of my thought when I first listened to this. I'm like, wait, is he saying that because his mom was raped as a kid, he's like, just get over it, life moves on? I'm like, that's really mean-spirited.
The thing is, when you said that,
I had a feeling that was not what it was about, but when I first heard it, that was my first thought. I'm like, that is really awful. Well, that's horrible.
And when you asked me if that was what the song was about, I pulled up the lyrics, and I was like, kind of thinking, oh, I could see how if you were just listening to this, especially if you didn't know anything about the band, you'd be like, what the fuck? But yeah, so this song, I mean, as far as I can tell from the lyrics and everything I know about White Trash Rob, I think it's about the cycle of abuse. It's him looking at the way that he was abused and neglected as a kid, and all the anger and confusion he feels for that, and then like learning about the way his mother was abused as a kid and kind of going like, oh, you were like kind of acting out on me, what happened to you, or maybe you were like trying to do better than what happened to you, but it still fucked you up. And this is another song that lyrically is pretty close to Rob's poetry that he does on the Nodcast. It's also a little closer in content to say like a Blood for Blood song, in that it's more personal, it's more introspective. This is kind of, I'd say, more poetic than Blood for Blood. It's rough. rough. It's pretty graphic in its portrayals of child abuse. It's not really that nice. I think the song is catchy enough and kind of has a gnarly enough riff on it that it makes it still pretty fun to listen to. The politically angry songs, even when they're psycho on this album, like Kill a Celebrity, Days of Revenge, there's still kind of fun songs that you can vibe to and they kind of feel empowering. This song it's just a pretty nasty subject matter. He does treat it with the gravity I think it deserves, but I also think there is something inherently funny about the type of tough guy hardcore that Rob Lind does, right? There's something inherently a little goofy about it, and sometimes to hear the tough guy growl talking about the severe child abuse, it makes me laugh a little bit.
No, totally. And then next song on here is Act of Faith, or maybe you could call it Act of Faith No More, because the Faith No More synths come back. Woo!
Yeah, they come back in a big way here.
Do you think he did that on purpose? Come on.
No.
Act of Faith No More. Come on.
That would be amazing, but I just can't see him doing something that overtly silly.
But yeah, so this one, once again, has the Faith No More and Synths coming back. These are definitely some of the more vague lyrics here, because most of the lyrics are obviously very blatant on what they're trying to say. This was like the Linkin Park lyrics of this album. I'm like, this could mean kind of anything to anybody, I'm going to be honest.
I do think we missed a track, though. I think we've got Shock and Awe.
Oh, yes, you're right. Shock and Awe. Now, this was the one about the Iraq War. And I want to say real quick, I loved the intro for this song. Intro for this song is fucking awesome. Like the instrumental here, or like the
the kind of build up here. I had a feeling that you would like this song because it's also, to my way of thinking, it's one of the more like nu metal-ish songs, for lack of a better term.
Yes, and I just mentioned obviously the song that we almost skipped, or the one that we skipped ahead here, but Act of Faith, how those lyrics are very nebulous. This one's not. This one's obviously about the Iraq War. About the Iraq War. And then, of course, talk about the cycle of abuse. I think a common sort of incorporation here is the cycle of abuse and also the cycle of terror and revenge.
Yeah, all of those things thematically tied together. Like, Ramallah seems to be White Trash Rob taking all of this personal trauma that he had vented about and talked about really explicitly and really unflinchingly in Blood for Blood, and almost like applying that same worldview to like politics and to like the world, right? This idea that like life is full of like pain and revenge and like do unto others, and you have to mature and try to transcend that, and he's not trying to glorify that, but he is saying that's kind of the reality of existence for a lot of people, and that's what Blood for Blood is. And then Ramallah is basically him going like, that's actually what the whole world is.
And to be clear, it's only cool when leftists do that, because when liberals do that, it's like, Donald Trump reminds me of my abusive Bernie-loving ex-boyfriend.
That was so awesome. Didn't someone say like once they were like, Bernie talking about Hillary being corrupt or something, or Democrats not doing a good job, reminded me of my abusive stepfather yelling at me.
No, you know what it was? It was something along the lines of Bernie said this or that, and it's like my dad, it was like Bernie reminds me of my dad opening the door at the, like, when he came home from work or something. I'm like,
yeah, something
really?
like that.
Yeah, let me be clear. I'm going to smack these hoes who don't make dinner on time. It's like, what?
Yeah, when I saw the stepdad in Boyhood, I was like, he does remind me of Bernie.
God, libs are dumb. I think we can all agree on that. But you know what, Brian? Speaking of dumb liberal songs, not really, but the next one on here, after Act of Faith, is Just Walk Away. Now, this is another song that honestly made me laugh. And it's not because
it's crazy.
Of lyrics. It's a crazy song because it's got butt rock, it's got, some nu metal elements, and then it ends with a pop punk like thing.
It's the
crazy.
Beatles. He's doing the Beatles. He's doing this Paul McCartney kind of show tuney da 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 da, and he ends by saying, "Just give me some truth" over and over, which is a famous John Lennon song. He's being like, you think I'm just a dumb hardcore guy, but I listen to all kinds of crazy shit, like the Beatles. I just want to say, I like that he did this song, because Ramallah for Rob was obviously an important way for him to kind of flex his muscles to, again, like I said before, expanding his musical vocabulary. And it's still, obviously it's hardcore, but Blood for Blood is very like classic tough guy 90s hardcore. He doesn't want Ramallah to be like that. He's a little more sophisticated. He's got a little bit more going on. And this song song, like Oscar Khan, I think is an attempt to show that, So I like Oscar Khan quite a bit, even though, I do agree with you that it's not their strong suit. This song, again, I'm happy he did it. I'm glad it's on the album. It is funny hearing him do like the McCartney show tune, da 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 type thing.
Yeah, it's hilarious. Like when I heard all the parts together, I'm like, no fucking way, they really did this.
And that is another way that I think I could see what you mean about the Faith No More influence, is maybe, and not to the same degree, there is a little bit of genre blending here. Like, I do think, obviously, at the core of this album is, like I said, there's some agnostic front, there's some Cro-Mags. I actually think there is a lot of suicidal tendencies and a lot of Poison idea. I was thinking about that this week listening to this, as I bet Robland is a big fan of Feel the Darkness. But yeah, the pop rock, the 60s rock influences, like the Doors and the Beatles, probably other psychedelic pop stuff from that era, maybe Jefferson Airplane. It's so weird, but it clearly made him so happy to get to show off those parts of his, influences. But it is kind of funny.
No, absolutely. And then the next song on here is Heartful of Love, excuse me. Now, this one is interesting because this feels like a sequel to Kill a Celebrity, but it's way later in the album. So I'm kind of surprised this was way later. And there's some interesting lines here. So I want to cut the brakes on every SUV in the world, and I'd love to burn down to ashes every jewelry store in the world. I'd love to drown in crude oil every spring break beach in the world. And I'm not going to say the specific line about the Hiltons. The less said about that line, the better.
We should say, just so listeners know, he says I'd love to R-word a Hilton sister. Pretty uncool, both yes, because obviously to be clear,
it's not the R word about Down syndrome people, the other R word, to be very clear.
Yeah, I'd love to retard a Hilton sister.
That's a Shane Gillis line, all right?
Obviously, it's a shitty thing to say. It's also shitty because Rob has he's written in the past, even well before this, about, the violence that is brought onto women, about survivors of abuse. Disappointing that he would use that phrase in such an edgy kind of try hard way to try to be transgressive, and I assume he probably wouldn't now. He's using it in maybe the most offensive way you can as an artist, which is to kind of abstract it, Kind of sucks quite a bit. I don't think it's indicative of most of the writing on this album or of Rob's person, but it sucks. It also does date the album, because who the fuck cares about the Hiltons, Nowadays, if you wrote that, you'd say some e-girl,
Yeah. He'd like to retard Belle Delphine.
Yeah, he should have said that. The libertarian logic chick that you were telling me about.
Caitlin Bennett?
No, the Twitter effective altruism.
Ayala?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
God, you can smell that bitch's pussy from a mile away. Ooh, she only showers 12 times a year or some shit.
She seems just heinous. I think, getting back to your point about this being sort of a sequel to Kill a Celebrity, I think that might be intentional. It might kind of tie in, those themes. This is the second to last track on the album. Lyrically, I think it is kind of meant to, it's kind of like a crass thing. It's that contradictory thing of, your music is really aggressive, it's really violent, you're really confrontational. But the thing that Crass always said, and I have issues with Crass too, is, quote, everything we write is a love song. And I think that's kind of, in a somewhat goofy, ham-fisted way, I think that's what Rob is trying to get at here, is the expression, right, of all this violence and all this animosity. It's not nihilism. It's you're doing it out of an anger, a righteous anger, which actually makes the use of the R word, the rape stuff makes it even more disappointing, because it's even more doesn't belong in this song.
No, absolutely. And then the next song on here is I would say the second most famous song after obviously the one on the Punisher soundtrack, but this is A Day in the Life. Now, this is a cover of a Beatles song. Now, this isn't a complete cover, obviously. They do change some of the lyrics. And I would say, Brian, maybe this is a basic bitch take. This is my favorite song in the album. I love this song. I think this is a great rendition of this Beatles song. I think it's fucking great.
I hated this for a long time. It took me a long time to come around on it.
So yeah, it's interesting because, and I did read a little bit of the lyrics of the original Beatles song, because even though I'm not a hater of the Beatles, I want to be very clear, but I have not really listened to a lot of the Beatles. I mean, I don't really know if there's a big reason to get into deep cuts of the Beatles at this point.
Yeah.
But I did read a little bit of the lyrics of that Beatles song, and it's actually fairly close to the Ramallah cover here, actually, which I'm kind of surprised by, that the Beatles were willing to go kind of that hard in the paint.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very very interesting. It's almost like it's a sarcastic song. I'll say that.
No, the Beatles song, the original Beatles song it's beautiful. There is a pretty significant number of people who consider it the best Beatles song ever. I'm not necessarily one of them. I'm a pretty big Beatles fan. So for me, like, let's say when I was in high school and listening to this album, I got to this track and I was like, no fucking way. It just seemed too goofy. It seemed too much like, hardcore guy going, oh, I actually like some other types of music. I'm doing a pop cover. Like, for some reason, for a long time, it drove me crazy. As the years went on, so I would go through phases where I would think this album was pretty cool, which is overall what I think. I'm like, this is a cool album. Rob's a cool guy. He's really taking some risks. He's saying some pretty heavy shit that, like, needs to be said, and he was doing it at a time that nobody was saying that. And when I was in the mood for, like, kind of, like, crossover hardcore album, I would put this on, at least a few tracks from it. But I would go through other periods of time where I'd listen to this and I'd think it was the whole album, and I would think it was so corny. I would think it was so earnest and so, like, tough guy trying to be deep that I just couldn't listen to it at all. And that second kind of inkling that I described, the tough guy trying to be deep thing, that for a long time oozed for me out of this cover. It still kind of does, but I've gotten to a point now where I kind of just, like, as a whole, when I listen to this album, I think enough time has passed and it's old. Like, this is basically a classic album now. It's 20 years old. It is literally 20 years old now. So now when I listen to it, I'm not thinking this is this corny, newish hardcore band like I was when I heard it for the first time. No, I'm like, oh, this is a piece of work that reflects a moment in time, and I can kind of put myself in Rob's way of thinking of, he's trying to capture this moment and all this pain in the world, and he wants to capture it with what he thinks is a beautiful song, like a noble and really melancholic song, and he's picked A Day in the Life. I kind of like it now. This is another moment where I think they kind of sound like Bad Religion to me. They're almost doing like a melodic skate punk thing, which if you're a hardcore band covering the Beatles, makes sense, I guess.
No, I definitely hear what you mean about the Bad Religion thing. And I also do want to expound a little bit on the lyrics. So the lyrics start off, like, I would say pretty close to the original Beatles song, but it ends with, because in the original song, it's 4,000 holes in Blackburn, Lancashire, and though the holes were rather small, they had to count them all. Now, the line here is 3,000 holes at New York's ground zero, and though the holes were small, we had to count them all. And the last two are, in the Beatles song, is, now they know how many holes it takes to fill the Albert Hall. And here, they say, now we know how many holes it takes to make the towers fall. Oh boy, Rob, that was 2005. You said that.
Yeah. There's another cool lyrical change. Rob says the U.S. Army had just dropped some peace on the Middle East. Pretty cool line.
No, this is like a really good, like, fucking, this must have went so hard in 2005 for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Clearly not you at the time, but for a lot of people, I'm sure this hit pretty hard.
What's interesting is when I listen to it now, and I like it now, it's interesting because a lot of times when punk bands, or especially hardcore bands, when they cover like an iconic pop band, it's like they try to be sarcastic, and my theory has always been that they act sarcastic to protect themselves, right? They know it's a harder song to play, and so they're like, well, if we pretend we don't really like the song and we're just being tongue-in-cheek, then we don't have to worry about it sucking. But Rob, clearly, he's treating the original Day in the Life with a lot of gravity. Like, he's picked this song very deliberately, and I think that shows in here. He's not being tongue-in-cheek. He's trying to capture that same kind of melancholic and honestly kind of apocalyptic feeling of the original song.
No, yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I agree. I think this is a great cover. In my opinion, my favorite song in the album. And just to clarify, Brian, I think there's 2 more tracks, correct? On the album?
There are.
Okay, because I was not able to find really a confirmation because some of the playlists had 16 tracks, some of them only had 14 tracks. In fact, on Genius, they only had 14 tracks for lyrics. But either way, there's still 2 songs left. So the penultimate
every version
song
of this
has If I Die as the penultimate song and Bye Bye as the last song, right?
Yeah, every version of the album that I've had has had both of those. Granted, I've never had a physical copy. I always downloaded it, or like now it's just on streaming. It's always had both of those tracks. It is possible to me that there was a version of this that ended with Day in the Life, because that would make sense,
No, it definitely would make sense. But yeah, so the penultimate song is If I Die. And I wasn't able to find the lyrics on here, but, once again, this is a pretty solid track. I don't really have too much to say about it, to be honest, because I wasn't able to find the lyrics, so I wasn't really able to get my, opinions on the lyrics overall. I did listen to it twice, but I just don't have as many deep thoughts about it as some of the other
My only real thought about this track is it reminds me a bit more of Rob's band, Sinners and Saints. Sinners and Saints was his project. If I'm not mistaken, it was between Blood for Blood and Ramallah. And it was what he describes as like pop rock. It was a band he started with his brother on guitar. And what I would say is it's almost kind of like, what you might call like street rock or like almost like British punk. It's kind of his version. To me, it's him doing like skinhead kind of like oi music, that type of rock and roll. He describes it as like punk, or I mean as like pop. And to me, that's what this song sounds like. It's a little bit closer to Sinners and Saints than like the kind of apocalyptic, revolutionary thing that Ramallah does.
No, totally. And then the last track on here is Bye Bye, which is hilarious, of course, that's the last track. But this is a very pop punk inspired track once again that I got, or I guess skate punk might be another term for it too. It's we didn't really talk about it too much, but the Adam 22 No Jumper interview, it was really interesting because Rob seems like somebody who is like very musically knowledgeable, which I was kind of not expecting. I didn't expect him to be like dumb or whatever, but he seems to have like a pretty like diverse music taste and a lot of music knowledge that I was not aware of. So I'm not surprised that he put all these like kind of disparate influences on this album. And even though they do sound kind of funny on certain tracks, it's cool that he tried. It doesn't sound fucking AI like fucking Sleep Token does.
Yeah, it seems to me like Ramallah for Rob, obviously it was important because it was him voicing his political opinions and, really putting stuff out there that it was important. I also think it was important for him coming out of Blood for Blood, so I'm more of a Ramallah fan than a Blood for Blood fan, but I've listened to a lot of Blood for Blood. I've heard all of their albums at least once, and, I think they're a pretty good time. People love Blood for Blood. They are one of the most influential hardcore bands in the 90s. Like, people are obsessed with that band. I think people are still obsessed with that band in Boston, But I think for him, coming out of Blood for Blood, he was like, well, I don't just want to be like another hardcore skinhead guy. I want people to know that I like all this other shit. I want to do other things and not just be like this standard hardcore guy. So I think it was really important for him to throw in like the slam poetry things and what I would say is like pop punk or skate punk. I have no idea if that's what he's going for, but I think you and I both pick up on the same thing. There's moments on this album that would not be out of place on like Epitaph Records or something.
No, absolutely, 100%. And also, I do want to say real quick, too, I do give Rob credit because he is the only Boston Irish guy who's not, like, the most racist guy of all time and, like, hates, like, Middle Easterners and everything. Like, the fact that he is pro-Palestine, I'm like, oh, you actually are Irish. That's awesome. That's great.
Yeah. Well, he talks about that in the No Jumper interview. I remember there's a part where he says he's talking about how, the way he describes it is he says he grew up in the projects.
In Charlestown specifically, which was, like, the like white ghetto of Boston for a long time.
Yep. And he says, he grew up obviously in the projects, a lot of addiction, a lot of broken homes, that addiction and kind of violence was just kind of a given. And at one point he says, hardcore saved me from there was a lot of regressive attitudes in Boston. There was a lot of negativity and hardcore saved me from that. And I don't know, what does Rob say? He says, and I internalized a lot of that and I was living a lot of that. And Adam 22 says, what do you mean? Do you mean like racism? And Rob says, oh, for sure. Yeah, no, I would be racist if it wasn't for hardcore, which is, I think that's probably true for a lot of people in his situation, but for him to admit it so openly was, pretty impressive. He's like, oh no, yeah, I would be like this regressive conservative person if not for hardcore.
No, and I think there's certainly something to be said for that. And also, talk about how Boston he is. He has, I would say, the most Boston accent of all time. It is incredible. He is like a caricature of somebody from Boston.
Yeah.
He's got the face, the tattoos. He's got the fucking, like, newsboy fucking, like, folk punk hat. It's awesome.
Yeah, he talks at one point about how him and his friends used to use the word liberal as an insult, and they didn't really know what it meant. They just knew it's a thing you'd say. They'd say it, like, as a synonym for, like, gay. They'd be like, get out of here, you fucking liberal.
Although, to be fair, in Ireland, they do that because they're all left-wing there. So that's why they're like, hi, you fucking liberal. Get talking here, you cunt. Like that. They do it in the not reactionary way.
Yeah.
Or to be fair, they could be homophobic with it, but that's it. No other bigotry. No other bigotry in Ireland.
I was just going to say, that's the same way that I use slurs. It's okay. I'm actually using it in the left-wing way.
I mean, to be clear, once again, having been to Ireland, there are so many statues of left-wing figures in Ireland that it would almost have to be only homophobia as the bigotry. It couldn't be anything else. I don't know against the English, I guess, but they're not really people. Let's be real here.
They're worms.
Yeah. But yeah, so that is the album Kill a Celebrity. Now, before we get to our pluggables, Brian, let's get into our final thoughts. Now, I really do appreciate, I'll go first because I know you're way more familiar with this, but I loved this album on my second listen. I liked it on my first one, although once again, I was sort of like, wait, what the fuck, Brian? What was Brian thinking? But on my second re-listen and having gotten more of a complete picture, and then of course with the Rob Lind interview that you recommended to me, which I did watch most of it except for like 15 minutes where the audio sounds like fucking shit. So I had to skip that part. But other than that, though, getting that context and listening to it twice, I think this is a fucking great album. Even if I don't love all the songs on it, I think this is a great album.
I feel similar about this. Obviously, this album is one that I listened to in high school. It's never been one of my favorite records. It's not like this super important formative album for me, but I come back to it periodically because, frankly, I think Rob Lind is a really interesting figure in punk rock and in hardcore and extreme music. I do think he has a very complete ethos, and he's funny. He's a pretty good songwriter. I've never been so crazy about any of his music, but I would recommend this album in particular because it's such a weird snapshot of underground music right in the mid 2000s. Like, it's such a weird brew of like radical politics, and also like clearly this is hardcore. Like, this Paramount genre here influences from artists that we've mentioned, Suicidal Tendencies, Bad Brains, but also I've always thought this. Sometimes I think it as a positive, sometimes as a negative. You could get a nu metal fan into this album without, I think, too much work. Like, the radical politics maybe stand out, but maybe not nu metal, but like maybe a fan of Rage Against the Machine. You could get into this album pretty easily, you know? Then there's the weird synths. There's just all these weird elements that come together. And it's just kind of like, wow, he's kind of doing this out of nowhere. Like, there isn't a lot of other hardcore that's quite like this, even now. Much less in 2005. Usually when hardcore is artsier like this, it's kind of, maybe it's kind of emo adjacent, or maybe it's kind of like, you know, I don't know, weirder, more experimental. But this is like capital H hardcore by like a Boston tough guy. But it's got all these like introspective and political lyrics and this, you know, melodic touches. It's very interesting.
No, absolutely. Yeah. This is an album that if you're a fan of like hardcore punk in like the late 90s, early 2000s, I would absolutely recommend it. And especially if you're into the idea of more diverse elements of like hardcore and metal and, you know, even, you know, like I said, talk about skate punk and pop punk and butt rock and all these things combined. Like, even though the mid 2000s, as you mentioned, Brian, was very much of a dark age of entertainment in general, which I do agree with, especially post 9/11. But in general, though, I do find it to be one of the more interesting eras of like metal and metalcore specifically, because like metalcore was going through an insane evolution. Like, it started off in the early 2000s with very much like At the Gates style metal, and then it eventually evolved into something completely different by the end of it. And even though I don't think this album has really much in common with metalcore, there are still elements of core in here for fucking sure.
Well, I do think that both of the things that you just alluded to are kind of reflected in a way in this album. Both the evolutions that were happening in hardcore, obviously. Metalcore is developing at a rapid pace and kind of becoming what we'll know it as now in the 2000s. We've also got the prominence of like emo, you know, melodic hardcore or post-hardcore, but also just the dearth of culture in the 2000s, because it really was in a lot of ways just kind of a wasteland. It was just kind of void in music and in film, certainly politically. But I think that some of the weird choices on this album are kind of, because you see Rob, who's kind of an older hardcore guy, right? He's been in hardcore since like the late 80s when he was a kid. So by the time he's in Ramallah, he's not like super young anymore. And he's kind of like seems to be going, well, what's next? You know, what's the current sound? Because there isn't one for hardcore, right? At least to his ears. He's like, I don't really know where to go with the future of this. Blood for Blood, who are this one of the iconic 90s hardcore bands, are broken up, and he's like, well, what do I do? And you're kind of seeing that reflected in him kind of frantically trying all these different things, you know, trying to assert himself in the face of this changing musical landscape.
Yes, exactly. And the reason I mentioned the metalcore thing, Brian, because once again, obviously, the late 90s, early 2000s metalcore was At the Gates core and ended with something very particular, which we will get into on our next episode, which I am so excited to talk about.
It is going to be a good one.
It's going to be fucking great. All right, so yes, that is our review of this album here. Now, let's get to our pluggables and our final thoughts at the end here. So you can follow me at Carlos Chantor on Twitter.com. And as well as always, please subscribe and follow both our YouTube and our Spotify channel, where we are uploading every episode simultaneously to both platforms. And as well as always, please donate to the Lucifer and the Father campaign. You know, of course, our good friends Scott, Shaw, and Robert are creating a fantastic series, Lucifer and the Father, here. They have one episode out right now, but they need more moral and financial support to get the rest of the series off the ground. And, as always, if you donate to the campaign, just send us a YouTube comment, send us an email, just show us proof that you donate to the campaign, and we will, within reason, match your donation about $20-25, because, of course, we want Scott, Sean, and Robert's show to become a reality, of course. And, of course, we've been mentioning on these last few episodes here the Luigi Mangione Defense Fund. Of course, we believe in it. We love Luigi. We think he's hot as shit. We also think he's not guilty, to be very clear. We don't just stand Luigi because he's cool and he's hot.
He is absolutely not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. There is no universe in which this person should be found guilty. Especially for fucking terrorism. Like, what is that? This is nonsense.
No fucking nonsense. In fact, honestly, if we're talking about a realistic world here, the guys in Ramallah should have been convicted of terrorism over Luigi if we had to choose one. I mean, I'm kidding, obviously. It's all
We're
free
getting
speech.
there.
But that's neither here nor there. Yeah, we're getting there. He just has to say blessed martyrs of Palestine one more time and they're gonna fucking deport him to El Salvador or whatever the fuck.
Ramallah are active once again, so maybe we'll have some white trash Rob calling out Trump in the near future.
Hell yeah. Well, speaking of things that are coming back, Brian, or I guess starting, technically, we now have our own Patreon page. Woo!
Yes!
So we're going to put that in last week's episode and this week's episode going forward, but we now have a Patreon page with a couple tiers if you want to subscribe to any of them. They're all very, I think, easy. There's a $1 tier. Well, technically you can just give us $1. It's not really a tier, but I put it in there just in case. But technically speaking, there is 4 tiers, but in actuality, there's 3 tiers. So there's a $5 tier, which is you get each episode 2 days early. And once again, we're not locking any content, but if you want to hear the episodes just a couple days early, you can give us $5 a month. You're guaranteed 2 to 4 episodes a month. So think about it as $2.50 or $1.25 a month for an early episode. It's really not that big of a deal. So
you think
please
about
give us money.
You will be ahead of the discourse. Everyone is waiting around thinking, what are Brian and Taylor going to talk about next? Where do we go in the middlebrow cultural revolution? What's the next Mao? How old are millennials? But you will know before all of your friends because you are that $5 patron.
You will know
you can lord that knowledge over them.
Exactly. You will know 48 hours. And they always say the first 48 are the most important. And then as well, we also have a $25 tier. Now, this is just basically an extension of the $5 tier. So, of course, you get early access, and we will donate both to the Luigi and the Lucifer and the Father campaign, both $10 each of that $20. And I did put in there, if either campaign closes early, we will donate the full $20 to that campaign. And if both of those campaigns close, we will just get rid of that tier altogether because we're not going to rip off our fans, obviously.
Yeah.
And then as well, to one lucky fan out there, we have a $100 tier where if you give us $100 every month, you get to pitch one episode and you get to be on one episode. Now, you can do that as a one go or you can do that as one or the other.
We are not going to do to you what a certain podcast did to me. Famously, as I've said on the program, I donated $100 to a podcast that said, if you donate $100, we'll review an album in a certain genre of your choosing. And I donated $100 and then had an album in mind that I really wanted the host to hear and give me their thoughts on. And they said, nope, we don't want to do it. And they kept my money, which we will not be doing to you.
Exactly. And it is, once again, every month. Now, we won't roll it over, but if you're not available, we won't roll it over, but we also won't charge you if you want us to. But either way, we'll also do the donation to Luigi and Lucifer and the Father.
Yeah, of course.
So it's more like $75 a month. Now, think about that. For $75 a month, you get, at a bare minimum, 2 to 4 hours of our time a month. That's amazing. That is a great fucking deal.
That really is a gift to you as well, because you get to talk with us and be around us.
Absolutely, and we're just such cool individuals, so why would you not? But once again, we're limiting it to one person, so we're not going to have 10 people and we'll have to do 10 episodes a month because we would have to quit our jobs to do that.
Which, if enough of you choose to donate in that tier, maybe we can consider it, but...
Oh, no, if 1,000 people do it, we will absolutely quit our job.
Yeah, I just don't see that happening just yet. Yeah, this is exciting for us. This is cool. We are at over 100 subscribers on YouTube. I'd have to check our Spotify numbers as well, but we've been doing doing this for, I think, what, coming up on 2 years now?
Oh, 2.5 years. We've been doing it for a
Two and
while.
a half years. Jesus Christ. Taylor and I talk a lot about kind of our vision for what we want to do going forward. We have pretty cool ideas to shake it up and stuff we've actually been thinking about and kind of formulating for kind of a long time that we are looking forward to. I actually think, if nothing else, the Patreon, and the tiers are, for us, for myself at least, it's sort of an incentive to continue fleshing that out, to be like, well, if people are sending us money, that's more incentive to kind of want to put out a good, interesting show. One of the things that we're aware of and we talk with each other a lot about is there's so many shows that are millennials talk about media through XYZ perspective. And we're aware that a lot of the time we have kind of fallen in that. But I think we've kind of gotten a grasp of what the show is. And I think anyone that listens to the show regularly has gotten a grasp of what the show is. We have sort of a method to kind of how we analyze things and how we look at the world and kind of what our rapport is. And for us, I think the Patreon's more about being well, this is an actual project that we're doing now.
No, absolutely, 100%. So, yeah, we are very excited for you to give us all of your money so we can make a good fucking show. We can continue to make a good show. And maybe someday if we make enough money, I will actually get a real Zoom subscription again because I can now afford it.
Just now getting over my bill paying season. I need to get a new mic. Eventually, I need to get a new laptop, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah. But you know what? Before we burn out our laptop battery and we destroy our microphones, I think it's time for us to go to bed. Because, Brian, talk about kill a celebrity. I want to kill my drive to be awake so we can go to sleep very soon. So have a good night, everybody. Sleep tight and don't let white trash Rob bite. He doesn't seem like a biter.
I think, for myself, I'm going to get cuddled up in bed and I'm going to put on Ramallah and relax to them because I have a feeling that next week's album that we review not going to be relaxing for me to listen to or to talk about.
No, absolutely. It will be a review to remember. So have a good night, everybody. Sleep tight, and we will come back with a fantastic episode next time.